Hello. Yesterday, we talked about how to analyze data from a little evaluation of a training program. Today, we are going to start talking about what do you do with the findings or the results. And first, let me remind you that we're not talking about findings from an evaluation study, like a one-off big assessment at the end of something that's over, but we're talking about what we're observing about a program as it's running and while we can still make changes. So remember back to our first video on Monday of this week, where we clarified our logic model and we defined output measures that included quality measures and outcome measures, things that we wanted for our participants. Today, we're going to be talking about what do we do once we've measured those things? How do we look at them? How do we think about them? How do we use them to make decisions? So, I'm going to be talking about two characteristics of those measures, what data point they're at, what the number is, and also what the trend is. And that's all we need to know, right? Are we headed up or headed down? And do we want to be headed up or headed down? That's it. So, and the process is going to be the same, whether we're talking about a quality measure, like did viewers find today's video interesting? And an outcome measure, right? Were the participants' lives better off? These are just smaller and larger cycles of feedback and evaluation. So the first thing we're going to do after we've created this measure, and remember that I said a measure pretty much has to start with a number sign or a percent sign. So once we've calculated it, we have just a really crisp answer. We're going to get a number like 3, 90%, right? It's going to be very, very clear. Now let's sit and look at that number. And remember, it's not a grade. This number is not saying that you did a good job or a bad job or that you're bad people or this is a bad program. Nothing like that. Let's just get curious about it. Let's say, why is it like that? Are we okay with where it is? Are we satisfied with this? Do we think it could be better? Do we think it's trending in the right direction? And we're going to ask ourselves a series of questions like, if it's not headed in the direction that we like, why? And not just, now ask yourself to really ask why a lot of times, because what we don't want to do here is restate the question, right? Why is attendance down? Because students aren't coming. That's just another way of saying attendance is down. But we really want to dig into this. Why do we think they're not coming? Do we think they have transportation barriers? Do we think our program isn't engaging to them? Do we think that they don't feel comfortable here? Let's explore all of the possible whys, right? That's our first step. Our second step is, if this is important and we're going to improve it, well, what does work in this field? Who else is doing something like this that we think is a useful model for us? And what promising practices or best practices could we incorporate into our programming, right? And then our third question is going to be, who do we know we can talk to, right? Who are our partners in this space? And they could be other organizations that do something like yours that might be able to give you some tips. They could be organizations that you could partner with. Like, for example, let's say you've had a hard time recruiting the right kind of students into your program. Well, should you talk to the local high schools or after-school programs or boys and girls clubs, right? Is there somebody in your environment who can partner with you and help create a solution to this problem? So those are the sorts of questions that we're going to ask. Now, who we ask them with depends on which kinds of measures we're looking at. So the closer you are to the left of your logic model, when you're thinking about outputs, quality measures, and short-term outcomes, those are generally staff level questions, right? And things that you can correct in very short cycles. Were there enough staff here yesterday? No? Well, let's staff differently today, right? These are not things that you should be looking at in annual cycles. And those are probably staff level issues. And staff should be able to talk about these measures, have conversations, make plans, and implement solutions. Now, if you're talking about outcome measures, if you're looking at your outcome measures and you're not getting the outcomes that your program is intended to, that brings up some slightly different questions. When you're looking at process measures or quality measures, the kinds of conversations you can have are, how can we do this a little bit better? How can we do the same thing a little more efficiently, a little bit more, I don't know, generously, right, in a more welcoming manner, right? How can we make our stuff more appealing, right? Those are fairly limited. Once you get to the outcome questions, right? If you're implementing the program that you thought you were implementing and you have good fidelity to the model and you're implementing in a high quality way, but your outcomes are not happening, that's a more complicated conversation. And that might mean that you're running the wrong program, right? If the model is being implemented correctly, but the outcomes aren't happening, it might be the wrong model. And now that is a higher level conversation, something that you need to engage your board on, right? It's a question of strategy and not process. So exactly the same set of questions, exactly the same conversation. It's just a matter of what stakeholders need to be at the table for the higher level conversations. And again, it's not a judgment on you. You tried a thing, you did your best, you held yourself accountable by measuring it, and now you're doing the correct thing by reviewing the data and making adjustments, right? So that's what you want to do. So let me just repeat the guiding questions because I think that they are so helpful. Is this okay? Are we happy with this number? Or are we happy with the way it's trending? Some of the time you're going to be like, yeah, it's okay. In which case, move on. Your process is done. If it's not okay, then why not? What's the story here? And there are some useful tools you can use around that, like 5 whys, different conversation starters like that, to help you really dig into, like, what are the fundamental things that we think aren't working here? And that might, bring up some additional experiments that you want to run in your organization. Then what do we see in our environment that helps with this kind of problem? And we're not talking about the symptom, right? The poor attendance. We're talking about the underlying problem, the lack of transportation, right? So it's not what helps in attendance problems, it's what helps in transportation problems, right? Understand that difference. And then the last question is, who do we know that we can talk to, right? Or who is having success in this space that we can get tips from, or who should we be partnering with, like your local transportation authority, right? Things like that. So that was step 4. Let's use the data. Tomorrow, which is the last part of the series, we're going to talk about, we've done all this, we've made a plan. Now, how do we implement that plan in our organization and monitor our performance, our staff's performance according to the plan? And so that is one more set of indicators that we can talk about. So thank you all for your time this afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow.